You know, there's only one Koan Sound. There's only one of any famous producer that you may or may not listen to. And while there might be artists that sound similar to each other, ultimately we're all artists and we're trying to explore our individuality. So while today is going to be featured sounds that might sound similar to Koan Sound, I think that it's important to make a point that I am never going to actually sound exactly like them, unless if I were to sit in the studio with them or they send me one of their patches, and even then it probably wouldn't sound the same in one of my songs. And also, if you are looking up these artists of how to sound like somebody and you are just trying to get to the very core of it, then I kind of feel like there's a lot that you may or may not be missing. As some of you may or may not know, I am a martial arts instructor from Bruce Lee's Jeet Kune Do. I have been teaching for a very long time. So something that I got from my instructor, whose name is Sifu Joe Ledlow, who was under Jerry Poteet, who was under Bruce Lee, is whenever he would teach class, he would say, you don't come to learn JKD, you come to learn from JKD. And it's something that I sat on for a while because I was like, no, man, I want to learn how to do all the cool stuff. And while there is all of that still applies through that structure, what he meant to say was that there's so much more to be had from learning the process. And that's kind of what the ultimate goal of today is to expose you to the process and to give you some exposure on how some of the sonic characteristics work within these basses. Does that make sense? I think that a lot of YouTube content creators make titles for clickbait, no offense, and rightfully so, because I understand, but they say, oh, well, this is how you're going to make a bass that sounds like this person, and sometimes they're close and sometimes it sounds like the complete opposite or just totally way left field of what that artist actually sounds like. And that's not to hate on them, it's not to bash on them, but I think that if we can kind of take the separate mindset of saying, here, I'm going to teach you this process and here's how you can make it your own. While it might be relatable to these artists, you are going to find your own individuality within all of these. Does that make sense? With all of that complicated information being said, let's go ahead and dive into this patch that is absolutely free on my Patreon, meaning that you do not have to sign up to have access to it. Just go to my site and then click on the FXP, or you can also find it on Discord if you are with me on there as well. So yeah, let's go ahead and get started. What's good, family? This patch is incredibly complicated, probably more so than it needs to be, but I tried to make this as cohesive and pack it full of features that give a lot of different tones for shaping your bass sounds. There is a little bit of processing at the end. It's really only 4 things which we can talk about, which is an autofilter that has some LFO, a little bit of overdrive. Keeping your bass in mono is important, and then an OTT, which, you know what I mean, I use on every single thing. And then kind of to shape that more prominent characteristic sound of this artist that we're listening to these days, you will throw this into a sampler and then play with the pitch bend. Other than that, let's go ahead and dive into SERUM. Okay, so I really want to stress that I try to use just about every feature, not every feature, but almost every feature that you can think of within this plugin, and that's kind of a big task to achieve because there really is so much. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to start from page to page and kind of go through everything, and then I'll show you how it's supposed to work, so that way you can create your own different variations of this bass. Because if you're just downloading the patch and then trying to use this in a song, then you could, but don't be that guy. Just don't be that guy, please. So let's make this vanilla and turn everything off. I like vanilla. And I'm also going to turn off all of these effects. And let's start just with the basic oscillators. Okay, so I think that I bypassed everything, and now we can go ahead and start. So there is a sub oscillator here with a direct output. On oscillator A, it's set to basic shapes, but it's really just a sine wave. Generally, when I make these kinds of sounds, I just use a sine wave because I can add my own harmonics to it. It's like, okay, you're going to make some soup. Start with water. The sine wave would be your water. You can add anything to it and still make it taste good, though it might take a lot. Weird analogy. But yeah, so the unison is set to 4 voices with a large detune, and the random is turned down. I think that 4 is the sweet spot. So if I play an F and then use a pitch bend, it has the right amount of oscillation that I'm looking for. If I turn this into a sine wave, I need to turn this down. It's like the perfect Reese that we always love. That's really loud, sorry. And you can kind of mess with any of these basic shapes if you want to, but for now I'm just going to use a sine. So the noise oscillator's turned on with pink noise, and the only thing that is being done here is that on this LFO I have the level turned up, and this is, there we go, just a little bit of white noise that you won't be able to hear until later, but don't worry about it. Oscillator B is designed to be variation, so this is also on basic shapes, but with this LFO on the wavetable position, you can get some neat movement along with the bend that's going to kind of make an interesting sound. And this is kind of cool because it will kind of rotate between some of these waveforms that may or may not make something interesting, but this isn't required. On the filter section, it's a double notch, and the LFO1 is messing with the cutoff of here and here that is shaping. This is going down. Oh, they're both going down. Actually, they're splitting up. So they're kind of separating from each other and then closing in later. Yeah. On the LFO1 tab, we have a triangle-like shape, and keep the macros in mind. I'll come back to this stuff later and show you how all that works. But okay, effects. I've used almost every single one and shown a variation between these, so let's cover this quickly. The distortion is the first one because distortion is going to be one of the main ways that you're going to color a sound. And what I mean by that is, well, just listen. We went from a sine to something that sounds like a square. If you have an oscillator that has more harmonics than a sine, then you can actually mess with the band pass or the high pass, but you can't hear anything because we only have really low harmonics right now. Another workaround would be to use some FM or to change like the compression on and all that. There's different things that you can mess with, but for now you can just follow along with this. This isn't really doing a whole lot. 6%, 31%, 9% on retrigger. It's just adding some stereo. The flanger is being automated by the LFO1, maybe the LFO3, 2, 1. Okay. Oh, I couldn't see the little dot. Yeah, it's being automated by LFO1, and then make sure to turn the feedback down because here is why. So keep it at a nice medium. The phaser has its own LFO, which is here. I don't know why it's not on there, but whatever. It's not that big of a deal. And this is just messing with the frequency just a little bit because tuning this knob ever so slightly is going to make a big difference. If you notice, the rate's also turned down, and I think that's other than the mix, but listen to this. You won't actually be able, let me just kind of cut ahead for a second and turn this on. So you can tell that when that's turned on, that it will make a big difference. But if you leave it kind of somewhere in the lower regions, like I'm usually playing F, so I kind of leave it at like 44 and then give it just a little bit to play with, then it will give it more of a vocal tone. It will kind of be like a whoa as opposed to like that's so dumb, whatever. All right, so there's some chorus. On here I have turned the delay 1 down and then made sure the rate is at 0.08, makes us kind of at half. The delay is an optional feature. Again, you won't hear it unless if the compression is on, but that kind of makes it a little bit more metallic. And the only thing that you do with that is turn the delay down to a really small number and then mess with the feedback. The filter section is going to be an important part because this is going to really have a big effect on shaping the sound. And it's a band notch that's being affected by LFO1 with the cutoff going up, the frequency of the notch going down, a little bit of drive, a little bit of resonance. Okay, so the reverb is also optional. This is a good way to add in ambience, but I wouldn't use it as your main bass line. Then finally we have our EQ, where I'm shelving this just ever so slightly and taking out some of the low mids. So as far as macros go, one thing that is really important is that I am using a bleed on the mix here. And what this does is if I am using a little bit less of mix, then it will allow the phase oscillation to go a little bit faster. Whereas if it's on a full mix, you can hear that it cuts more of the sound. So if you kind of want to alternate between those, then it's really cool because you can move in between those, if that makes sense. The sound of that is moving at a really slow rate right now because that's set at a 16 bar, but normally it's set at 1/2. And this is also something that you can kind of pseudo mess with whenever you're playing with pitch. I think that's it as far as the effects, but we can talk about the parameters here now. So the bleed is just messing with the mix or the dry wet of the final filter, and the pitch is on envelope 2, which is making it a little bit more percussive at the very beginning. And you can just go into matrix, find envelope 2 on here, which is right here, and then turn the master tuning, which is on global, and turn this up to 24 and mess with the decay. So the macros on the decay here. And you can also get some cool stuff like that. So if I were to turn off the filter, this is going to be a little bit louder, so bear with me. Or sounds like something from like Space Invaders or something, but that will give it that effect, which is basically a pitch envelope, which we also have on the sampler. And kind of like what I was keeping in mind whenever I was making this patch is like I wanted to make this emulate a sampler as closely as I could, and while it's obviously impossible, there are some unique characteristics that you'll pull from trying to replicate that, but also keep in mind that it's not going to be the same. So the last thing that we have is the speed, and because it has a really long attack, it's going to go from slow to fast, and I need to turn this down and kind of set that up here to 16 bars. And if I play it here, it's going to start slow and then go to that 1/2 that we were playing. And then if I have it faster, then you can kind of create wubs with that. And it's kind of cool because it starts with a pitch bend that you can also automate. Or you can just use that as a downbeat bass and then have that repeat. So you have a lot of options that are actually pretty cool whenever you're messing with this. In regards to the Oscillator B, you're going to get different timbres that you're pulling out because you're using a different source sound. So and you know, there's a lot of different variations that you can pull from that, and it makes it sound kind of unique and kind of fun to just tweak some knobs and see what you can get out of it. Again, outside of that, there's not really a whole lot going on. The Autofilter, as explained before, just is on a LFO. The overdrive is going to make it a little bit more clean. I guess a little bit more dirty in the high end. Heh. Bass mono is a big one. It's going to kind of solidify everything that's under 200 hertz into mono to keep everything consistent. And then of course we have our OTT, where I'm cranking the highs on this. Green is pulling it up, orange is pulling it down. That also makes the noise on here a little bit more audible. And overall, like, while it's not quite as defined as a lot of these other tunes that you'll hear within, you know, professional sounds, this is a great starting point for us to kind of have a reference in order to shape the sound further. And while you can go into further processing from it, you could always just bounce this out into a sampler, add in a little bit more OTT, and then mess with the pitch bend to get that classic sound that we all know and love. I didn't do anything different other than throw this in and add an OTT. And part of it is volume. and then part of it is just the characteristics of how a sampler works. So in retrospect, I didn't do any frequency splitting, or did I? I did do frequency splitting, but I didn't do it in a proper chain, which is something I'll talk about in a future video. But I didn't do like a dedicated frequency split, but that's a frequency split. The low pass and high pass, that's a frequency split right there because I'm only distorting the low end. Multiband is a frequency split. This is technically only isolating frequencies. There's a low pass filter on here. That's frequency splitting. So we'll talk about more of that in the future. But for the most part, I didn't do anything that was too complicated outside of the box. And I just wanted to show you that there's a lot of different ways to approach these kinds of sounds, and then also kind of show you that I want you to develop your own workflow and your own ideas from this patch in itself. That's pretty much all I got for you. I know it was really long-winded, but I hope that it was interesting in exploring this patch. If I can, I'd like to inspire creativity within you as opposed to teaching you just how to make a sound. So in the future of all my videos, and if I haven't done so already, I don't want you to just look at something and say, this is how this one specific task is done. I'd like you to be able to see how many different problems you can solve from the content that I create, if that makes sense. But anyways, thank you guys so much for watching my content. Be sure to like and subscribe and all that. I usually don't even say that in my videos anymore. Yeah, go get that patch and feel free to ask me questions or give your own feedback about how you make these sounds, or, let's have a conversation. And other than that, happy producing. Have a wonderful day. I'm going to get a cup of coffee.
So, you want to learn about the Koan Sound?